Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. What is the place of citizens with disabilities, particularly physical challenges, under the present dispensation in Nigeria? Is there a defensible reason they shouldn't be given a chance to participate actively in governing Nigeria? Why didn't someone from among this special category of Nigerians make it into President Muhammadu Buhari's 43-man list of ministerial nominees currently being screened by the Senate? Is it true that the most powerful American president in living memory was a man who spent part of his presidency in a wheelchair? These are some of the questions for which answers have been demanded by persons living with disabilities in Nigeria. For a chat on this, we are now being joined by David Anyaele, a disability activist, social worker, public relations and development consultant, and a member of the Nigerian Institute for Public Relations. He's also Director, Center for Citizens with Disabilities. David, you are welcome to the morning show.
Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for joining us for this conversation on the plight of persons with disabilities in Nigeria. Now, in 2007, Nigeria signed up to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And then we signed the optional protocol in 2010. And then in January 2019, we had in place a National Disabilities Act. But in spite of all of this, it doesn't seem as if the government of Nigeria is very enthusiastic about persons living with disabilities beyond signing papers. What do you think is responsible for this? And what can we do beyond advocacy to engage government?
What is more responsible to this is because of our culture, our tradition, our background as Nigerians. There is this philosophy in this country that showcases survival of the fittest. And by so doing, vulnerable people, marginalized population are excluded in virtually all aspects of governance in Nigeria. The way we design our governance in such a way that if you're not at the policy table, if you're not part of the decision making, nobody thinks about you, nobody considers your issue. As such, Nigeria found itself in this kind of scenario. Over the years, there have been this agitation for a system that recognizes people with disabilities as part of Nigerians, appreciating the fact that Nigeria has the highest number of people with disabilities in Africa, which is projected as more than 25 million Nigerians. What that means is that any government policy or program designed at the exclusion will inevitably infringe on their fundamental human rights. What we are doing today, just as you have bring this issue to limelight before the public, is a key way of drawing attention to all stakeholders for them to appreciate the fact that there is a law today that prohibits all forms of discrimination on the grounds of disability. And it was signed on the 17th of January, 2019. The law, as it is today, prohibits discrimination on the grounds of disability. It also encourages awareness on the rights of persons with disabilities. What that means is that as Nigerians with disabilities go around the world to represent Nigeria in sporting activities, government is under obligation to ensure that they are protected and Nigerians acknowledge their value to the society.
Thank you. Rightfully so. This law did get signed into law this year, and it's quite concerning because it did also take 9 years before we finally got to this point. And with the figures that you gave us, 25 or over 25 million Nigerians at about 15% of the country being disabled, it's quite worrisome that it did take us this long to get the Disability Act passed through. Now, what changes have actually taken place since this act has been passed through? Because, I mean, one of the greatest prides that the 8th National Assembly gave themselves was the fact that they managed to pass the most number of bills compared to any other Senate. Yet the concern of the citizen is whether these bills are actually taking effect. Is the prohibition against the Disability Act, rather, is this actually taking effect since it was signed in this year?
You should recognize that this act came into place at the third end of the President Muhammad Buhari's first tenure. And as we are speaking right now, the government is yet to form its cabinet. It is expected that when the government forms its cabinet, the critical areas of government response to the act will be implemented, especially the establishment of a national commission on persons with disabilities. Section 31 of Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Prohibition Act provides that the government will establish a commission on persons with disabilities. Part of the role and responsibility of this commission is to support government to ensure that its program and activities are in line with expectation of people with disabilities, especially issues that has to do with access, inclusion, participation. These are the roles of this expected of this commission. However, where the government is yet to form is yet to come into shape, the question begins to hinder. That is to say, when is this commission coming, to place? That is why we are concerned about, how the government will come into shape, so as to ensure that people with disabilities are not left behind.
Well, I mean, that takes me to the next point, which is about the implementation of the law. In Nigeria, the problem is not coming up with documents or additional bureaucracy, but there are usually challenges in terms of implementation. Now, that Prohibition of Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Act also talks about 5% of all employment opportunities to be reserved for persons with disabilities. Yes, you've also referred to Section 31, which talks about the National Disabilities Commission, which is most likely to be domiciled in the Ministry of Women Affairs and Social Development, which is given the responsibility to follow up on the optional protocols and the UN Convention that was signed. But how do you ensure that there is proper implementation, particularly in the light of the fact that the two umbrella bodies of persons with disabilities in Nigeria, there's a lot of quarrel when you read about those two bodies. It's like, even persons with disabilities play their own politics. They're unable to speak with one voice. And in this regard, I'm referring to the Joint Association and then the other one called the Ascent, which is also another umbrella body. With this internal disunity within the community, how do you hope to get government to effectuate the law that is in place?
We have been engaging the system, we have been engaging the government to get the disability bill passed. When it was passed, the last, actions that led to the passage of that act was not led by JONAPID or Ascent, as you mentioned. It was led by a coalition of disability organizations that moved speedily to intervene and ensure that people with disabilities in Nigeria are protected. We don't depend on these associations for people with disabilities to get what belongs to them. What we need is to sensitize Nigerians on the need to protect citizens with disabilities and ensure that relevant sections of that act is implemented. And one of the things we will be doing is to create awareness, sensitize the public. It may interest you to know that that Disability Act was, the passage of that act was led by Center for Citizens with Disabilities to ensure that the rivalry or misunderstanding or politicking among umbrella bodies do not infringe on the needs and aspirations of Nigerians with disabilities. So what we are saying is that the government owes us the obligation to ensure that the government implements relevant sections of the act, especially the setting aside of the 5% employment opportunity for people with disabilities. During the town hall meeting, or the candidates' town hall meeting during the electionary campaign, the president said he's not aware. And when he said he's not aware, he said he's not aware that the bill has been passed, transmitted to his office. What we'll be doing henceforth is to create awareness and ensure that the president is aware, to ensure that the president understands his role and responsibility. Graciously for us, the commission is domiciled at the office of the president. That means is that the president will not be ignorant about his role and responsibility in ensuring that the act is implemented. So we are not going to allow the bickering between JONAPID or any other umbrella body of people with disabilities to affect the expectations of Nigerians with disabilities, because more than 99% of people with disabilities in Nigeria do not belong to these organizations.
Now, earlier on, you made a point about the government needing their cabinets in order for this act to actually take any sort of effect. But There are greater concerns, sir, because it seems as though there are also no persons with disabilities being represented in governments. And this lack of representation is not just relative to disabled people, but other intersectional systems of oppression that are all intertwined. It could be women, for example. How is this going to play off for Nigeria in terms of an inclusive political field? And what role do people like you, advocates like you for disability rights, have to play in ensuring that the government actually sees the necessity of an inclusive government that represents all of its people?
My worry is that when we talk about inclusive government in Nigeria, politicians talk along party lines. They talk along ethnicity, they talk along religion. An inclusive government is a government that involves the vulnerable groups, that involves marginalized population to ensure that no one is left behind. We are worried that the 43 list that was sent to the Senate, none of the names, is a person with disability. And we last week, we draw the attention of the public on this issue, calling on President Muhammad Buhari to send at least 3 names of competent persons with disabilities to the Senate for them to be, screened as ministerial nominee. Absence of persons with disabilities in the, Federal Executive Council of President Muhammad Buhari will lead to non-inclusion, will lead to exclusion, will lead to a system that designs its program and policies at the exclusion of persons with disabilities. And unfortunately, this is the situation we find ourselves since the foundation of this country. That is to say, government designs its policies and program without considering that more than 15% of the total population of this country may not access such policies and programs. So it becomes, important that we draw attention of the president on this issue to ensure that he includes people with disabilities as members of ministerial nominee. We will continue to, build the capacities of all stakeholders, especially line ministries, because building the capacity of line ministries, building the capacity of stakeholders, political parties, judiciary, and others will lead to a system that all agencies of government will understand their role and responsibility in implementing the act. The challenge we have is that this act, while it was a bill at the National Assembly, was not sponsored by the executive. It was a private member-sponsored bill. A civil society who supported, the passage of this, this bill to an act, we are under obligation to mobilize as many resources as possible to lead Nigerians, especially state actors, for them to appreciate their role and responsibility to ensure that all the letters of the act is implemented. That is our role, and we'll continue to do it. We know it's a heavy work. We know it's going to be challenging. We know it's going to be resourceful, but with support and partnership with the media, we will go faster than we may think or imagine.
Well, David, how serious is the challenge of stigmatization, considering the fact that even beyond government, the attitude towards disability in Nigeria is one of welfare and charity, rather than inclusion or social adaptation or empowerment?
It's a serious issue because our religious backgrounds tends to portray people with disabilities as accursed people, people who are victims of bad behavior or sins of their fathers or sins of their families. As such, at the community level, people tend to stigmatize them. People don't want to relate with them. We have also a system that tends to give impression that a person with disability, all he needs is charity by giving him bread and butter and for the person to go and relax. But that is not correct. We are here in this country. We have seen people with disabilities leading in the sporting arena, bringing gold medals for this country at different levels with minimal support from the state. We have also seen persons with disabilities abroad, Nigerians with disabilities, leading different international cooperation and agencies, from people with disabilities from this country. So we are saying that disability is not a cause. Disability is not a sin. Anybody can acquire disability. That you are...
Well, David, hold your thoughts. We'll need to take a short break. David, please hold your thoughts on that line of engagement, and then we'll take a short break and we'll come back to you. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Still with us in our Abuja studio is David Anyaele, a disability activist, social worker, public relations and development consultant. Now, David, welcome back to the morning show. Before we went on break, you were talking about stigmatization. And you were making a very strong argument that there is ability in disability, and that the stigmatization is unjustified. You may continue with what we are saying.
Yeah, and that is why we are worried that at the employment level in this country, most employers of labor, discriminate against people with disabilities. At the institutional level, infrastructures in this country are not designed for access for people with disabilities. If you go to healthcare systems in this country, you only discover that healthcare systems in Nigeria are not accessible to people with disabilities. In fact, our survey on access to public infrastructure in Nigeria shows that more than 99.5% of public infrastructure in this country are not accessible to people with disabilities. Just a visit to Federal Secretariat here in Abuja, you will discover that there is no access. If you're on wheelchair, you can't enter. If you're a deaf person, there is no directional guide to lead you to the ministry you want to go to. If you're a blind person, the same challenge. As such, we need persons with disabilities to be members of the Federal Executive Council of President Muhammad Buhari in order to support him, to draw his attentions to all his policies and programs, and to ensure that it is accessible, it is inclusive, and people with disabilities benefit. It is by so doing that we can say that Nigerians are benefiting. Anything short from that, you will discover that inequality will increase, abuse will equally increase, poverty will widen, because it is known that poverty is the major cause of disability, and disability also causes poverty. And when poverty programs of the government are designed at the exclusion of people with disabilities, it means that the expected result may not be achieved.
Now, that's a very heinous statistic that you gave, that 99.5% or about 90% Now, I believe that the new act also has a clause that states that companies or buildings have a 5-year transitional period to ensure that they do make sure that their buildings become disabled friendly. And this is a huge issue that a lot of people living with disabilities in the country are speaking about. Have we seen any changes this year? Have we seen any of these transitions going on? Or is this once again another part of the act that may not be enforced?
It will be enforced. There is a moratorium of 5 years. This act is about 6 months old, 6 months with a transition period of a government that ought to drive the process. As I speak to you, at the Center for Citizens with Disabilities, we have developed a strategic plan on how to ensure the implementation of this act between now and the next 5 years. And we're also talking to our partners across the world to see how they can come to our rescue to see that, the critical areas of this act is implemented, especially issues that has to do with public infrastructure. Engineers need to be trained, architects need to be led, all other groups that contribute to public infrastructural development in this country need to be guided. As you all know, it's a country where issues of disability is a new thing to them, and many don't understand their role and responsibility. So on our part, and part of all civil society in this country, all people who believe that people with disabilities need to participate in socio-economic development of this country need to come together and put their voice on this issue and call on all relevant agencies, groups, stakeholders to ensure that all their program activities are designed in compliance with the provisions of this act. It is by so doing that we will be able to say that between now and the next 5 years that this act will be implemented. We are going to monitor. We are going to also look at how government and its agencies are responding to this act, including the National Assembly. So it's a huge task. We are going to do our best. We know government pass laws and they don't implement it. But as you know, this act was achieved by effort of civil society groups, especially people with disabilities. As such, we are not going to fold our hands and watch anyone, ignore the provisions of this act.
Yes, well, I like your optimism about the act that is now in place. But we've been talking more about the federal government. What is the level of engagement at the state level in different parts of the country, considering the fact that many of these state governments are far behind in the conversation? We have had instances of state governments expelling persons with disabilities, otherwise tagged as beggars, from their states, asking them to return to their states. Some states even arrest persons with disabilities who take to begging. Do you have a framework in place for engaging state governments, local governments, and other stakeholders within the country?
Yes, sir. As we speak to you, it is ongoing. As at the level of Center for Students with Disabilities, today, we're engaging in Kaduna State. We're also engaging in Akwa Ibom to encourage the two states to pass disability bill, in their various states, or to domesticate this disability act in their states. Today, we're engaging persons with disabilities, stakeholders around persons with disabilities in these states. Beyond these two states, many states have also passed Disability Act. States like Lagos State, Bauchi, Ekiti, Ondo, Jigawa, Kwara, Anambra, Adamawa, and others that are also expected to pass the bill. The bulk of the challenge we are having is capacity on the part of state actors to implement this act. And that is why at the level of CCD and other organizations, they are building capacities, leading all these agencies to see how they can operationalize the provisions of this act. On those states, the governor, Governor Akeredu, recently inaugurated the board of the disability agency in his state. In Anambra State, capacity is being built across board to ensure that the law is implemented in that state. In Lagos State is also doing well in implementing disability law in the state by establishing a Lagos State disability office, Lagos State Office for Disability Affairs, LASODA. And this LASODA is also working. Government is investing in a disability fund, which they are using to support people with disabilities across Lagos State. Many states, at the level of their own law, how it is states, they are, improving or in terms of implementation. If you get to Plateau State Disability Commission is also working, led by people with disabilities who are supporting the government to ensure that the provisions of their law as regards to people with disabilities are thoroughly implemented. As for other states, like Abia State, that in 2015, the assembly, the fifth session of that assembly, passed disability law, but Abia State Governor, the then Abia State Governor, both Governor T.A.R.G. and Governor Victor Okezie-Ikpeazu failed to protect people with disabilities, by signing that bill into an act. So in Abia State, we have a state in Abia that, design their program and policies at the exclusion of people with disabilities. And such states like Abia, we are going to encourage them, we are going to lead them to ensure that people with disabilities are protected in the state. Imo State, we're also going to engage them across board, across the federation. Okay. We are going to take this Disability Act to spread as much as we can.
Okay, that's great. It's great to know that there is heavy interaction going on at the state level, of course. Now, let's speak about the role of the average citizen as well. It's one thing for the government to play their role. It's another for CSOs to also play their role. But what does the average Nigerian citizen need to do to play a role in debunking a lot of myths and stigmas that are attached to persons with disabilities?
It is to sensitize them. For them to understand that no one is immune from getting disability. If disability occurs to you today, what will you do? It is by that understanding and reasoning that will make people or Nigerians to begin to act and respond in that manner. In as much as there is high poverty in Nigeria, there will be increase in number of people that will suffer disability. As I speak to you today, somebody somewhere in one orthopedic hospital is losing one part of his or her body or the other. So to pretend that it does not concern me, it does not support, the system. So what we expect every Nigerian to do is to say no to discrimination on the grounds of disability, is to say no to erecting of public infrastructures that are not disability friendly, is to say no to the exclusion of people with disabilities in governance. That is why I commend your television station, the Arise TV, for raising this issue. Most, media television organizations shy away from bringing disability issues in their studio because of fear of, maybe they feel that they are not implementing the act as it's supposed to be. So if you ask them to discuss the provisions of the act, they will shy away. But we will continue to lead and encourage them that to implement the act does not need robust budget. It's not up to 1% of what you need to address other issues. So the fear of the role and responsibility should not be there at all. So together, we will be able to continue to sensitize, to encourage other Nigerians for them to understand their role and responsibility to ensure that we put an end to this issue of stigma, discrimination, and abuse of people with disabilities.
Well, David, quickly before we go, some clarification on statistics. You said at the beginning of this conversation that we have about 25 million, disabled persons in Nigeria. That's a bit scary. I know you are quoting the World Disability Report of 2011. And that report also says we have just about 3.6 million persons living with disabilities in Nigeria, with significant disabilities. And that's close to the 2006 census, which put the number at 3.2 million. What exactly is the figure and what kind of pattern do we really have?
What the issue is that in 2006 population census, the National Population Commission failed to build the capacity of the enumerators to capture disability data. I had an interaction with some of the enumerators, and they told me that they never captured disability data. We invited the then Executive Secretary of the National Population Commission to give us statistics or the figure of persons with disabilities using 2006 census. And that was where we generated the 3.6 million Nigerians with disabilities. That figure is 40. The instrument used to gather that data is also very weak. As such, you cannot use it to interpret disability population in this country. Using World Bank and World Health Organization report 2011, which states that more than 15% of international population has one form of disability or the other. In fact, if we juxtapose it with the 200 million population of Nigeria, you'll be getting about 30 million plus. You are aware that every day when there is crisis, when there is unrest, beyond the casualties are people who suffer disability. You are also aware that due to poor health systems in this country, many people suffer disability.
Well, David,
is also
thank you very much.
A good number of people with disability every day. So,
thank you very much, David, for that clarification. I think that that would provide an opportunity for further reflection. Thank you very much for coming to the morning show.